Welcome to David's Stories. Today we follow Frank Carter, an elderly father overlooked by his family on a trip to Athens, who discovers discarded boarding passes, cancels their return flights, and embarks on a solo European journey to reclaim his independence, forging new connections, and finding profound self-worth. Subscribe and hit the bell for weekly videos uncovering mysteries and truths. Share your thoughts below. Let's start the story. The rain fell in whispers, a soft conspiracy between the night and the earth soaking the driveway, where I stood, hands raised in a half-hearted wave that lingered too long. My son Greg's SUV vanished into the mist, its taillights glowing like dying embers swallowed by the curve of the street. I was alone again, left to guard their house, their dog, their neatly curated lives. They'd said I was too old to travel with them to Athens, too slow for layovers, too brittle for cobblestone streets. "Just stay, Dad," Greg had said, his voice casual, like he was asking me to water the plants. "It's better this way." His wife Caroline had tossed me a list of chores with the same brisk efficiency she used to command their golden retriever, Max. Twice a day, salmon treats. Don't forget to double lock the doors. Her words carried the weight of a kindness I didn't believe. I stood there, the damp air clinging to my skin, the scent of wet leaves, and regret curling around me. My granddaughters Emma and Lucy hadn't even looked up from their phones to say goodbye. The youngest, Lucy, was filming herself, her face lit by the glow of a screen that held more of her attention than I ever would. I nodded to no one, told the empty air to have a good trip, and turned back to the house I'd paid off decades ago, a house that no longer felt like mine. Inside, the silence was surgical, cut only by the hum of the Wi-Fi router, its blinking light pulsing like a heartbeat I didn't recognize. The minimalist shelves, the smart lights, the sterile tidiness. It was all theirs, not mine. My wife Linda's warmth had long faded from the curtains, the hallway, the air itself. She'd been gone 7 years, taken by ovarian cancer that crept in slow and cruel, stealing her breath and her laughter. I'd bathed her when the nurses left, held her hand through every scan, every whispered question. "Is this it?" When it was, I buried her with a letter in her coat pocket, words I'd written but never shared. Just mine, just hers. I fed Max, washed the dishes they'd left stacked in the sink, and poured myself a glass of scotch, not to celebrate, but to remind myself I still could. The amber liquid burned a quiet rebellion against the pre-portioned meals in the fridge, as if I were a guest in my own life. I went to bed early, not tired, but because staying awake felt like waiting for something that wouldn't come. The sheets were cold, the room too still, and Max's soft snores at the foot of the bed were the only proof I wasn't a ghost. The next morning, Max barked at the recycling truck, his sharp yips pulling me from a dream I couldn't recall. I shuffled outside in my old navy sweater, the one Linda said brought out my eyes, to wheel the bin to the curb. The air was crisp, the kind that sharpens your edges, and that's when I saw it. A white envelope peeking from a torn paper bag like a secret begging to be found. I tugged it free, my fingers brushing against damp cardboard. The envelope was heavy, sealed with a travel agency's logo, its edges slightly crumpled as if someone had tried to hide it. My name wasn't on it, but something told me it was meant for me to find. I carried it inside my pulse, quickening, though I couldn't say why. The kitchen table became a courtroom as I slit the envelope open with a butter knife. 4 boarding passes spilled out their ink stark against the wood. Greg, Caroline, Emma, Lucy. Destination Athens. Departure 2 days ago. My name was nowhere to be seen, not as a backup, not as an afterthought. I held the passes, my hands steady despite the hollow ache spreading through my chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was clarity, sharp and cold as a blade. They'd never planned to take me. All the months of vague promises. "We'll see, Dad." Maybe next time had been a lie, a script written before the conversation even started. I sat there staring at the passes like they were evidence in a trial I hadn't known I was part of. The coffee I made was the kind I used to drink on job sites. Black strong, no nonsense when I was still an electrician, when my hands carried the weight of copper coils and the hum of live wires. I was good at it. Not brilliant, just solid. Machines didn't ask for much, just consistency. And I gave them that. But my family. They'd stopped asking for anything at all, except for me to stay put, to fade into the background of their lives. The envelope sat there, its presence louder than the ticking clock. I traced the edges of the passes, my fingers lingering on the printed names. There was something almost ceremonial about it, like holding relics of a life I'd been written out of. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just sipped my coffee and let the silence grow heavy with questions I wasn't ready to answer. Why had they hidden this? Why not just tell me? And then a quieter thought, one that felt like a shadow moving across a locked room. What else have they hidden? I stood, walked to the living room, and opened the top drawer of Greg's desk where he kept his mortgage papers and important documents. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, maybe proof, maybe nothing. My fingers brushed against a small locked box I'd never seen before, its surface, cold and smooth like it belonged to someone else's secrets. I didn't try to open it. Not yet. But its weight stayed with me, a mystery I hadn't asked for, but couldn't ignore. I returned to the kitchen, the boarding passes still on the table. Max nudged my leg, his eyes soft and expectant, and I patted his head, grounding myself in his simple loyalty. The house felt different now, not just empty but foreign, like a stage set for a play I'd been cut from. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over Greg's number, then Caroline's, then no one's. Instead, I dialed the travel agency, the number printed in fine script on the envelope. A young woman answered, her voice bright and professional. "I need to cancel some flights," I said, giving her the reservation number. She hesitated, her keyboard clicking softly in the background. "Sir, these were used 2 days ago for the outbound trip. Are you sure you want to cancel the return flights?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady, surprising even me. "Cancel them." Another pause, longer this time. "Can I ask why?" "No," I replied and hung up. The act was simple, almost too easy, but it felt like breaking a chain I hadn't known was there. I wasn't angry, not exactly. It was something deeper, something that tasted like resolve. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning, not because the house needed it, but because I did. I folded Caroline's laundry, left in the dryer like an afterthought. I took out the trash, the envelope now buried beneath coffee grounds and eggshells. I fed Max, his tail wagging like a metronome, oblivious to the shift inside me. By noon, I stood in the hallway staring at the closet where Linda's things still hung untouched since her death. I opened it. The scent of her lavender perfume, faint but unmistakable, a ghost that hadn't yet left. My old navy duffel was there, tucked in the corner, its leather straps worn but strong. Attached to it were her travel tags, faded but intact, her handwriting curling across them in loops I could still trace in my sleep. I didn't remove them. I let her memory stay a quiet passenger for whatever came next. I packed lightly, one pair of slacks, a sweater, the blue button-down Linda always said, made my eyes look like the sea. My passport was still valid, its pages crisp, a version of me frozen in time. I checked my savings account, more than enough, no debts, no one depending on me anymore. The realization was both a wound and a key. I booked a one-way ticket to Athens Economy Isle, no insurance. I didn't need a safety net. I called my neighbor Mel, her voice warm and unintrusive. "Going somewhere?" Frank, she asked. "Just stepping out for a bit," I said. Pausing. "Can you feed Max for a few days?" "Sure thing," she replied. "No questions, no judgment. That's why I chose her." That night, I sat on the porch. Max at my feet, the wind stirring the chimes Linda had hung years ago. She'd bought them at a roadside stand in Santa Fe. Said they kept the silence from getting too loud. I understood her now in a way I hadn't before. The chimes sang softly, a melody of absence and possibility. I didn't leave a note. I didn't lock Greg's desk drawer. I didn't owe them explanations. I fed Max, patted his head, and closed the door behind me. The cab arrived on time, its headlights cutting through the dark like a promise. The airport was alive, chaotic, a pulse I hadn't felt in years. I moved through it not as a shadow but as a man who belonged. At security, a young agent glanced at my ID. "Traveling alone, sir, for now," I said, and he smiled not with pity, but with a nod that felt like respect. On the plane, I sat beside a woman who didn't speak, her eyes fixed on the clouds beyond the window. We traded nods, nothing more, and that was enough. I folded my hands, the duffel stowed beneath my seat, Linda's tags pressed against the canvas like a heartbeat. The plane climbed the world, blurring below, and I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not sadness, but a quiet power like a door unlocking in a house I'd forgotten I owned. As the clouds rolled beneath us, I thought of that locked box in Greg's desk, its cold surface and hidden weight. What was inside? A letter. A secret. Something they didn't want me to see. The question lingered, a thread I'd pull later when the time was right. For now, I was moving forward toward Athens, toward something I couldn't name, but could feel a mystery unfolding, a life reclaimed, a man stepping out of the shadows and into the light. The airport terminal buzzed with a restless energy, a symphony of hurried footsteps and muffled announcements, but I moved through it like a shadow slipping between cracks of light. My navy duffel hung heavy over my shoulder, Linda's faded travel tags brushing against the canvas, with every step whispering her presence like a secret I wasn't ready to share. The boarding pass to Athens was tucked in my jacket pocket, its edges crisp against my fingers, a talisman of a decision I hadn't fully named. I wasn't running away, not exactly. I was stepping toward something, though its shape remained hidden like a figure just beyond the fog. The security line was a slow crawl, but I didn't mind. Each step forward felt deliberate, a quiet rebellion against the life I'd been assigned. The young agent who checked my ID had eyes that lingered a moment too long, as if he sensed something in me, a spark, a fracture, or maybe just the weight of a man who'd stopped waiting for permission. "Traveling alone, sir?" he asked, his voice polite but curious. "For now," I replied, and his nod held a trace of respect, like he knew I was carrying more than just a bag. I passed through the scanner, my boots echoing on the polished floor, and for the first time in years, I felt the world shift beneath me, not collapsing but expanding. On the plane, I took my seat by the aisle, the duffel stowed beneath me, like a promise I'd made to myself. The woman beside me was silent, her gaze fixed on the clouds rolling past the window, her fingers tracing the edge of a worn silver locket. We exchanged no words, only a nod, and that was enough. I didn't need conversation. I needed space to breathe, to let the hum of the engines drown out the echoes of Greg's voice, Caroline's instructions, the absence of my name on those boarding passes. As the plane climbed, I closed my eyes, and the memory of that envelope in the trash flickered like a half-forgotten dream. The boarding passes. Greg, Caroline. Emma Lucy had been discarded with such carelessness, as if my exclusion was a detail too small to matter. But it wasn't just the passes. It was the locked box in Greg's desk, its cold surface lingering in my mind like a riddle I hadn't yet solved. What was inside? A letter. A confession. Something they didn't want me to see. The question coiled around me, tightening with every mile the plane carried me from home. I opened my eyes, the clouds now a second Earth below, and felt a strange clarity settle in. I wasn't just leaving. I was rewriting the script they'd handed me. The act of canceling their return flights had been my first line, written in silence, inked in resolve. I hadn't called to confront them, hadn't demanded explanations. I'd simply acted, and that act was a key turning in a lock I'd forgotten I held. The flight was long, the hours stretching like a canvas waiting for paint. I didn't watch the in-flight movies or flip through the magazine in the seat pocket. Instead, I pulled out my passport, its pages worn but intact, and traced the photo inside. The man staring back was older lines etched across his face, but his eyes held something unyielding, something I hadn't seen in years. I closed the passport and slipped it back into my pocket next to the boarding pass, next to the weight of a decision that felt like both betrayal and salvation. When we landed in Athens, the heat greeted me like a memory heavy and unapologetic wrapping around me as I stepped off the plane. The airport was a chaos of voices and languages, a labyrinth of motion. But I moved through it with purpose, my duffel a steady weight against my shoulder. I hailed a taxi, the driver's eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror, his face lined with stories he didn't share. "Where to?" he asked in accented English. "A pension, near the Plaka," I said, naming the place I'd found online, a modest guest house. Nothing fancy, just clean sheets and a fan that worked. He nodded and we drove in silence, the city unfolding around us like a map drawn in haste. The streets were narrow, lined with whitewashed walls and bursts of bougainvillea, the air thick with the scent of olives and dust. I leaned back, letting Athens breathe into me, its pulse quickening mine. The pension was small, its wooden door creaking as I stepped inside. The woman at the desk, her hair tied back with a scarf, looked up with a smile that didn't ask questions. "Name," she said, her fingers poised over a ledger. "Frank Carter," I replied, and the words felt heavier than they should, like I was claiming something I'd almost forgotten. She handed me a key attached to a wooden tag, its edges smoothed by years of hands. "Second floor," she said. "No elevator." I nodded, climbed the 2 flights and opened the door to my room. It was simple white walls, a single bed, a ceiling fan slicing the air with a soft hum. I set the duffel on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle. From the window I could see the Plaka below, families weaving through the streets, tourists snapping photos, children chasing each other with laughter that echoed like bells. I didn't cry, I didn't speak. I just listened to the fan, its rhythm carving the quiet into something I could hold. That night I changed into the blue button-down, the one Linda loved, and walked to a cafe in the square. The air was warm, the tables lit by flickering lanterns, and I ordered lamb and olives, savoring each bite as if it were a declaration. The waiter, a young man with a quick smile, didn't rush me. I ate slowly, no phone, no messages, just the world moving around me like a river I'd finally stepped out of. For the first time in years I didn't feel forgotten. I felt present, and that was enough. But the mystery of the locked box followed me, a shadow I couldn't shake. Back in my room I pulled out a small notebook. I'd packed its pages blank but heavy with possibility. I wrote a single line, "What are they hiding?" The question wasn't just about the box. It was about the years of half-truths, the sidelong glances, the way Greg's laughter had turned brittle, Caroline's instructions sharp. I closed the notebook, but the question lingered, a seed planted in the dark. The next morning I woke to the sound of church bells, their notes weaving through the streets like a call to something ancient. I shaved not for anyone else, but to see my face clearly in the mirror. A face that still held stories, still carried strength. I walked through the Anafiotika district, its crooked stairways and whitewashed walls glowing under the sun. Cats lounged on low fences, their eyes lazy but knowing, and I felt a kinship with them, creatures who moved through the world on their own terms. At a small market I bought a handful of figs and a bottle of mineral water from a woman who called me Papu grandfather with a wink that felt like a gift. I sat on a bench under a fig tree watching people pass, their lives unfolding without my permission. A girl in headphones walked by, singing softly. Her voice a melody I didn't recognize but wanted to remember. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a single vibration, but I didn't look. Not yet. I wasn't ready to let their voices pull me back. That afternoon I found a narrow street lined with bookstores, their windows fogged with titles in languages I couldn't read. I stepped into one, the air thick with the scent of old paper and ink. The shopkeeper, an older man with glasses perched on his nose, nodded without speaking. I wandered the aisles, my fingers brushing against leather-bound spines, until I found a small journal, its cover embossed with a labyrinth. I bought it, not because I needed it, but because it felt like a map for a journey I was only beginning to understand. Back at the pension, I opened the journal and wrote another line, "I am not their shadow." The words felt like a vow, fragile but firm. and I tucked the journal into my duffel next to Linda's tags. That night I stood on the balcony, the city glowing below, and felt something stir inside me, a power I hadn't known I still possessed. It wasn't anger or vengeance. It was the quiet strength of a man who'd stopped asking for a seat at a table he'd built. But the mystery deepened. As I packed for the next leg of my journey, Florence, a city Linda had loved, I found something in the side pocket of the duffel slipped there as if by accident. A small folded note, its edges yellowed in Linda's handwriting. Frank, keep moving. The world doesn't end where they think it does. My breath caught sharp and sudden. She'd written it years ago, maybe during one of our late-night talks, but I'd never seen it. Had she hidden it for me to find now? Or had it been there all along, waiting for this moment? The note changed everything. It wasn't just a message. It was a key, a clue to a life I'd let slip away. I folded it carefully, tucked it into the journal, and felt the weight of her words settle into me. Linda had always seen more than I did, her eyes catching light where I saw only shadows. Now she was guiding me, not back to her, but forward into a world I'd forgotten how to claim. I booked a train to Florence the next morning, the ticket, a one-way promise. As I boarded, the platform was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of diesel and dawn. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving, not Greg, not Caroline, not even Mel, who was feeding Max. I didn't need to. The world was moving with me now, and I was no longer a man left behind. I was a man in motion, chasing a mystery that felt like my own. The train pulled away, the tracks humming beneath me, and I touched the note in my pocket. Linda's words, a quiet pulse against my fingers. Athens faded behind me. But the questions remained sharper, now edged with possibility. What else had they hidden? What else had Linda left for me to find? And most importantly, who was I becoming step by step in a world that no longer owned me? The train to Florence rocked gently, its rhythm, a heartbeat beneath my feet, pulling me away from Athens and into a world that felt both foreign and familiar. I sat by the window, my navy duffel tucked beneath the seat. Linda's note folded carefully in my journal. Its words, Frank, keep moving. The world doesn't end where they think it does, a quiet pulse against my thoughts. The Greek countryside blurred past olive groves and golden hills, stretching like a painting that refused to stay still. I wasn't chasing answers, not yet, but I was chasing something, myself perhaps, or the man I'd forgotten how to be. The locked box in Greg's desk lingered in my mind, a shadow I couldn't outrun. What was inside? A secret they'd buried to keep me in my place. A truth Linda had known but never shared. The question was a thread, thin but unbreakable, weaving through every decision I made. I touched the journal in my pocket, its labyrinth-embossed cover a reminder that some paths are meant to twist before they reveal their purpose. In Athens I'd tasted freedom, but it was raw, unrefined, like the first sip of coffee too hot to swallow. Florence promised something different, Linda's city, where she'd spent a semester studying art history, sending me postcards scribbled with dreams of light and color. I'd kept those cards in a shoebox under our bed, their edges worn from years of quiet handling. Now, as the train slowed, I felt her presence again, not as a ghost, but as a guide, urging me to see what she'd seen. Florence. The light of memory. Florence greeted me with a quiet elegance, its narrow streets lined with honey-colored stone and rooftops that glowed under the Italian sun. I checked into a modest pension near the Arno, its elevator creaking like an old friend reluctant to speak. My room smelled of lemon soap and aged, the window opening onto a view of laundry lines and red tiles that Linda would have photographed. I stood there, letting the city breathe around me, its pulse steady but unhurried. I walked slowly, not because I was tired, but because I could. Past bakeries with warm bread scents, past bookstores with fogged windows, past courtyards where locals read newspapers without glancing up. I wasn't a tourist ticking off landmarks. I was a man learning to exist in a place that didn't know my name. At a cafe under the shadow of the Duomo, I ordered a sandwich wrapped in wax paper and a bottle of water, the pigeons gathering near my feet like conspirators. A street violinist played something slow and sad, the notes curling around me like a memory I didn't want to lose. That afternoon I visited the Uffizi not because I cared for art, but because Linda had. The halls were crowded with tourists, their cameras flashing like fireflies, but I moved slower, stopping before Botticelli's Birth of Venus. The painting was softer than I'd expected, its curves suggesting motion beauty, arriving unannounced on a shell. I stood there until my knees ached, searching for what Linda saw, the light, the possibility, the way a moment could hold eternity. A girl no older than Lucy dropped her phone nearby, oblivious, as she chattered to her mother. I bent to pick it up, handed it back, and the mother thanked me without looking. I watched them walk away loud and unaware, and wondered if I'd once been that blind to the weight others carried. Back at the pension, a note waited under my door, the handwriting careful but unfamiliar. "Mr. Carter, thank you for being a quiet guest. My father says you remind him of someone he loved." It was from the innkeeper's daughter, her words simple but heavy like a stone dropped into still water. I read it twice, then left a note in return. "Tell him thank you." I didn't know why it mattered, but it did. That night I found another relic in my duffel, a postcard from Linda tucked into a side pocket I hadn't checked in years. It was from Florence, dated decades ago, her handwriting looping across the back. "Frank, the light here feels alive. Come find it someday." My chest tightened, not with grief, but with wonder. Had she known I'd come here alone searching? Or was this another piece of the puzzle she'd left behind, a map drawn in fragments? I slipped the postcard into my journal, next to her note, and felt the mystery deepen, a thread pulling me toward something I couldn't yet name. Lisbon, the Song of Absence. The train to Lisbon was long, 12 hours of golden hills and olive trees blurring into one another like a dream unrolling. I carried Linda's postcard and note, their weight a quiet anchor in my pocket. The conductor didn't speak, and the woman beside me chewed gum, scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the world outside. I didn't mind. Lisbon wasn't asking me to explain myself. I arrived at dusk, the station alive with late commuters and students dragging backpacks across cracked tiles. My feet ached from sitting, but it was a good ache, proof I still had bones to move. The guest house I'd chosen had chipped blue shutters and white tile walls, its imperfections honest and welcoming. The woman at the desk, her hair in a bun, spoke in clipped English. "You are alone?" she asked, tapping the register. "For now," I said, and she handed me a heavy key, pointing to the staircase. No elevator. I didn't mind the climb. My room smelled of sea air and lemon polish, the balcony overlooking a narrow square where soft voices and a child's laughter drifted up. I didn't unpack, just opened the doors and let the city exhale around me. That night I slept harder than I had in months, not from exhaustion but from the absence of questions I no longer needed to answer. In the morning I shaved the blue shirt, now faintly scented with salt. The guest house offered breakfast coffee, in small cups, eggs crisped at the edges, bread that cracked under my teeth. I ate slowly, savoring the act, and asked the woman at the desk where I could hear Fado, the music Linda had loved. She wrote an address on a slip of paper, her smile knowing. No tourists there, just real people. I wandered through Lisbon's streets, past bookstores with unreadable titles and parks where pigeons scavenged crumbs. A young couple danced barefoot under a sycamore, laughing with their whole bodies, and I smiled without meaning to. My phone buzzed, a note from Mel. "Max is fine. Where are you?" I didn't reply. Not yet. I wasn't ready to tether myself back to their world. That night I found the Fado bar down a narrow alley that smelled of garlic and history. The door was heavy, the sign hand-painted and fading. Inside, the room was dark, lit by candles in wine bottles, the air warm with breath and longing. I ordered a glass of red wine, dry and sharp, and took a seat in the back. The singer, a woman in her late 60s, entered 20 minutes later. Her gray hair loose, her black dress simple but proud. She sat on a stool, the guitarist beside her strumming a few notes, and then she sang. Her voice was a wound, and a bomb weaving tales of ships that never returned, sons who forgot to write, rooms echoing with absence. I didn't understand the words, but I felt them, each note slicing through the silence I'd carried for years. My eyes stung and I let them. No one noticed. No one cared. That was the freedom of it, not being invisible but being irrelevant to everyone except the part of myself I'd silenced too long. After the last song, the room stayed quiet, no applause, just a shared stillness. The singer passed my table, her eyes meeting mine for a moment, a knowing glance that held no judgment. I nodded. She nodded back. It was enough. Back at the guest house, I found another note under my door. This one from the manager, Mrs. Helena called. She says the children miss you. I folded it and placed it in the trash, not out of anger but because their absence had taught me something their presence never could. I wrote in my journal, "They miss me now, but do they see me?" The question felt like a door I wasn't ready to open. Seville, the weight of truth. Seville welcomed me with warmth, its streets alive with the scent of orange blossoms and the rhythm of flamenco echoing from hidden courtyards. I checked into a guest house near the Guadalquivir River, its walls lined with cracked tiles, its balcony offering a view of boats gliding like silent promises. I wore the yellow scarf I'd found in Linda's things folded in my pocket like a quiet declaration, not ready to wear it openly, but unwilling to leave it behind. I walked to a cafe with peeling green shutters where the waiter Arturo brought me coffee without asking. He nodded as if we'd known each other for years, his eyes carrying a story he didn't tell. I sat there watching the world move, children tossing bread to ducks, old men playing chess on milk crates, lovers arguing softly in doorways. My phone buzzed again, a voicemail from Greg, his voice tight with something like guilt. I didn't listen. I deleted it, not out of spite but for peace. That afternoon I wandered into an art gallery tucked behind a bakery, its sign reading "Portraits of Silence." The walls were lined with photographs of older men and women, their faces etched with stories that didn't beg to be told. One image stopped me. A man sitting on a wooden chair staring at the sea, his eyes holding a lifetime of unasked questions. I stood there, my breath shallow, wondering if I'd become him or if I was becoming something else entirely. The curator, a young man with ink-stained fingers, approached. "You see something in that one," he said, not a question. I nodded. "Who was he?" "Someone who stayed," he replied, his voice soft but heavy. "The artist's father, painted after he passed. I didn't buy the photograph, but I carried its weight with me. That night I wrote in my journal, 'I am not the man who stays.' The words felt like a spell breaking a chain I hadn't seen. Then another discovery, a small key tucked in the lining of my duffel, its brass surface etched with a faint L. Linda's. Had she hidden it there, knowing I'd find it now? My heart raced, the locked box in Greg's desk flashing in my mind. Was this the key to it? Or to something else entirely? The mystery deepened, a labyrinth with no clear exit. But I wasn't afraid. I was curious, alive, in a way I hadn't been in years. Cordoba. The echoes of time. Cordoba arrived like a whisper. Its heat heavy but loyal, like an old dog that knows your name. I stepped off the bus into a light that revealed everything. Cracks in the stone-faded paint, beauty that didn't beg for attention. I walked until my knees ached, past fountains filled with coins, past musicians playing songs I didn't know but felt in my bones. In a narrow street lined with bookstores, I found a copy of A Farewell to Arms, its pages worn underlined by a stranger's hand. I bought it not for the story but for the evidence of someone else's life pressed into its margins. That night, in a small inn with a cracked window, I opened my journal and wrote, "I am here." 3 words, simple but heavy, a claim to the space I'd taken. The next morning I visited a courtyard known for its flowers, reds, oranges, purples, that reminded me of Linda's scarves. I stood there watching petals move in the wind and felt her presence again, not as a ghost, but as a guide urging me to keep moving. My phone buzzed, another message from Aiden, my grandson, "Grandpa, I saw a photo of you in a travel blog. Are you in Spain? That's so cool. I smiled, picturing him 12 years old, his eyes bright with questions about rockets and stars. I replied, yes, and someday maybe you'll join me. Bring your shoes and carry your bag. He sent back a rocket emoji and a single word. Thanks. The message warmed me, but it didn't erase the mystery of the key, the box, the secrets my family had buried. I wandered into a shop filled with leather-bound journals and old maps, the air thick with time and glue. The shopkeeper, an older man with a quiet gaze, handed me a small brass compass, its needle trembling slightly. For direction, he said, but his eyes suggested it was for something deeper. I carried the compass back to my inn, its weight, a counterpoint to the key in my pocket. That night I dreamed of Linda, her voice soft but clear. The box isn't the end, Frank. It's the beginning. I woke with a start. The room bathed in moonlight, the compass glinting on the nightstand. The dream felt like a message, a piece of the puzzle I was still assembling. The unraveling thread. As I moved through Cordoba's old quarter, the stones whispering in languages long dead, I felt the thread of mystery tighten. The key, the note, the postcard, were they Linda's way of guiding me or something more? Had she known I'd need to break free to find myself in the spaces she'd loved? I stopped by a small chapel, its door ajar, and leaned on the railing, the city sprawling below. My phone buzzed again, a text from Lucy, Grandpa. I miss you. Are you okay? I stared at the words. Her question simple but piercing. I replied, I'm somewhere with music and lemon trees. I'm more than okay. I didn't know how long I'd stay or where I'd go next. But I knew one thing: I was no longer the man they'd left behind. I was Frank Carter, a man with a compass, a key, and a journal filled with questions that were mine to answer. The world was wide, and I was walking its edges step by step, unraveling a mystery that was as much about me as it was about them. The streets of Cordoba hummed with a quiet rhythm, the kind that settles into your bones without asking permission. I walked through the old quarter, the brass compass in my pocket, a steady weight against Linda's note and the mysterious key I'd found in my duffel. The key, small, etched with a faint L, had become a talisman, a question mark that followed me from city to city. Was it meant for the locked box in Greg's desk or for something else entirely? The thought coiled around me, tightening with every step. But I didn't rush to answer it. Some mysteries unravel slowly like threads pulled from a tapestry. You're not ready to see whole. I stopped at a cafe near the Guadalquivir River, its tables spilling onto a cobblestone square where pigeons pecked at crumbs and children chased the fading light. Arturo, the waiter, who'd become a silent ally, brought me a cafe solo. Without a word, his nod carrying the weight of understanding. I sipped slowly, the bitter warmth grounding me, and watched the world move. Boats gliding on the river, old men arguing over chess, a young couple laughing under a fig tree. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a faint vibration I'd learned to ignore, but this time I glanced at the screen. A voicemail from Greg. His name stared back at me, sharp and insistent, like a crack in the stillness I'd built. I didn't play it, not yet. Instead, I pulled out my journal, its labyrinth-embossed cover worn from travel, and wrote, "They reach for me now, but what do they want?" The question wasn't just about Greg's call or Caroline's messages. It was about the years of sidelong glances, the half-truths, the way they'd reduced me to a shadow in their lives. The key in my pocket felt heavier, as if it held answers I wasn't ready to face. I closed the journal and let the river's rhythm carry my thoughts, its slow certainty a reminder that not every question needs an answer to move forward. That evening I wandered into a small antique shop tucked between a bakery and a bookstore, its air thick with the scent of polished wood and time. The owner, a man named Paulo with silver hair and quick fingers, was repairing a clock, its gears spread across the counter like a dismantled heart. "You're looking for something," he said. Not a question, his eyes meeting mine over the rim of his glasses. "Maybe," I replied, my fingers brushing a brass compass on the shelf, its needle trembling as if it knew more than I did. "Or maybe I'm just passing through." He smiled, a knowing curve that didn't press. Things find you when you stop chasing them. He handed me a small wooden box, its surface carved with a labyrinth that mirrored my journal's cover. "For your secrets," he said. And I bought it not because I needed it, but because it felt like a piece of the puzzle I was assembling. Back at the guest house, I placed the key inside the box next to Linda's note and postcard, and felt a strange calm settle over me. The box wasn't the one in Greg's desk, but it was mine, a vessel for the questions I carried. I slept with the window open, the breeze lifting the curtains like a blessing, and dreamed of Linda again. She stood in a field of rust-colored brush, her voice soft but clear. "The key isn't for their secrets, Frank. It's for yours." I woke with a start, the room bathed in moonlight, the compass glinting on the nightstand like a star that had fallen into my hands. The next morning I received a text from Aiden, my grandson, his words bright and unpolished. "Grandpa, I told Mom, you're probably not mad, just tired of being quiet. I saw your picture in a travel blog again. Are you in Cordoba?" Attached was a sketch rough and smudged of me sitting on a balcony with a coffee cup, a curtain blowing in the breeze. Underneath he wrote, "This is how I imagine you." I stared at it until the screen dimmed my chest tight, with something I hadn't felt in years. Recognition not as a father or a caretaker, but as a man. I replied, "You're a good listener, Aiden. Better than I was at your age. Keep drawing." He sent back a rocket emoji and a single word. "Cool." It was the closest thing to understanding I'd had from anyone in that family, and it warmed me like the sun on the cobblestones outside. But the warmth didn't erase the shadow of Greg's voicemail or the note from the guest house manager that arrived later that day. "Your daughter-in-law called again. She says the children are confused." She sounded surprised. "You're not home." I chuckled, not out of amusement, but because they thought I'd stay on the porch waiting for their return. They didn't know I'd already returned to myself. I walked to the river, the yellow scarf still folded in my pocket, and sat on a bench watching boats pass like silent promises. A boy nearby struggled with a kite, its string tangling in the wind, and his grandfather, gray-haired, steady, held it higher, running until the kite caught the breeze and soared. The boy laughed, and for a moment I was back on the beach at Cape May, running with Greg, a red kite trailing behind me like fire. He'd called me a hero that day, but heroes fade when memories do. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from Lucy. "Grandpa, I miss you." "Mom says you're mad. Are you?" The words hit like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through the quiet I'd built. I stared at the screen, picturing her slight stoop, the way she carried apologies in her shoulders. I replied, "I'm not mad, Lucy. I'm somewhere with music and lemon trees. I'm okay." I didn't expect a reply, and none came, but her message stayed with me, a crack in the wall I'd built between us. That evening I visited a flamenco bar. Arturo had mentioned its entrance, hidden behind a crumbling archway. The room was small, the air thick with smoke and longing, the stage lit by a single lantern. The dancer, a woman with eyes like embers, moved with a ferocity that felt like a challenge, her heels striking the floor like a heartbeat breaking free. I watched, my hands folded, the key in my pocket, pressing against my thigh. The music was a language I didn't speak but understood its rhythm, echoing the questions I carried. What are they hiding? What am I finding? Back at the guest house, I opened my journal and wrote, "They reach for me now, but I'm not theirs to hold." The words felt like a spell, not of anger but of clarity. I wasn't running from them, I was walking toward myself. But the mystery of the key, the box. Linda's note, they wove a thread I couldn't ignore. I dreamed again that night, this time of a door I couldn't open, its lock gleaming with the same L as the key. Linda stood behind it, her voice faint. "You're close, Frank. Don't stop." I woke with my heart racing. The room still dark, the compass needle trembling as if it knew where I needed to go. The next day I boarded a train back to Seville, the city folding me into its warmth like an old friend. Arturo greeted me at the cafe with a nod, his eyes carrying a quiet pride. "You've been somewhere," he said, setting a coffee before me. "Cordoba," I replied, and he smiled as if he knew it wasn't just a place, but a piece of me I'd reclaimed. That afternoon I wandered into a market, its stalls bursting with oranges and almonds, the air alive with voices and the clink of coins. A woman selling leather journals caught my eye, her hands weathered but steady. She handed me a small book, its cover embossed with a spiral that seemed to pulse under my fingers. "For your truths," she said, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. I bought it not because I needed another journal, but because her words felt like a clue, another thread in the labyrinth. Back at the guest house, I found a letter slipped under my door, the handwriting. Greg's, its edges uneven, as if written in haste. My breath caught the key in my pocket, suddenly heavy. I opened it expecting anger or demands, but found something else. "Dear Dad, I know you saw the boarding passes. I know you canceled our return flights. We were stuck in Athens for 4 days scrambling to fix it. Caroline's furious, the girls are confused. But me, I knew it was you. I don't blame you, I think I admire it. I don't know when we stopped seeing you as a person. Maybe after Mom died. Maybe before. I'm sorry for forgetting the man who taught me to build birdhouses, to throw a curveball. If this is your piece, I won't chase it. Just know I remember. Love, Greg." I folded the letter, my hands steady but my chest tight. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was a crack in the wall they'd built around me. I placed it in the wooden box with the key, the note, the postcard, and felt the mystery shift, not resolving but deepening. What else had they forgotten? What else had I? The next morning I walked to the river, the yellow scarf now loosely draped over my shoulder, a quiet flag of my presence. I sat under a fig tree, watching the water move its surface, carrying no regrets, only motion. My phone buzzed, a voicemail from Caroline. "Frank, we're back." "Where are you?" "The house is a mess. Greg's furious. We trusted you." Her voice was strained, not with anger, but with something closer to fear, as if she'd realized too late that the scaffolding of their lives was built on my patience. I listened to it twice, then deleted it, not out of spite, but because it was noise static from a station I no longer tuned into. I wrote in my journal, "They trusted me to stay, but never to leave." The words felt like a door closing, not with a slam, but with a quiet click. That afternoon I visited a craftsman who carved wooden boxes, his shop smelling of cedar and thyme. I asked for one small enough to fit in a coat pocket. "For something precious," he said, not a question. And I nodded, not explaining. When it was done, I placed inside it a folded napkin with Linda's name, a lemon candy from the cafe, and a Polaroid I'd found in my duffel, a snapshot of me smiling under a fig tree, taken by a stranger in Cordoba. I mailed it to my address back home, no note, just a return label. Frank Carter. It was a promise to myself, a record of the man I was becoming. Days passed, each one slow and warm, like honey dripping from a spoon. I worked at a bicycle repair shop near the river, not for money but for movement. Elias, the owner, was retired but kept the shop open because, as he put it, hands need something to fix, or they tremble. We spoke in fragments, his English. Broken my silence, fluent. He told me of his wife's passing, his daughter's life abroad, and I nodded, recognizing the shape of solitude, not loneliness, but a quiet that holds meaning. One morning, while tightening a stubborn bolt, Elias said, "You look at broken things like they can work again." I didn't reply, but his words shifted something inside me. Maybe I did believe that broken things could be useful not as they were, but as something new. That night I wore the yellow scarf around my neck for the first time, its color a declaration I didn't need to announce. Then the unexpected happened. I was walking down Calle Mateo's Gago past the cathedral's shadowed walls when I heard Caroline's voice, sharp and exasperated, cutting through the crowd. "No, Greg. It was your job to confirm the hotel." I froze my body, refusing to move, the scarf warm against my skin. There they were, Greg in cargo shorts, his walk heavier than I remembered. Caroline clutching a map she wasn't reading. Emma and Lucy trailing behind their faces lit by their phones. They didn't see me. I was just another shirt in the sun, another shadow on the cobblestones. I watched them argue their voices, a familiar cadence of frustration. And then they turned down the street toward my cafe where Arturo knew my order, where I'd carved a space for myself. I followed, not close, just enough to witness my steps slow and deliberate. They passed the cafe without pausing. Caroline too distracted, Greg too sunburned, the girls too absorbed. I smiled not from spite, but from recognition. They were exactly who they'd become. I stepped into the cafe, took my usual seat, and Arturo angled my chair toward the alley where my family stood debating whether to visit the Alcazar or stop for lunch. I sipped my coffee, each drop a truth I'd once overlooked. They moved on, no consensus. Just shared weariness, and something inside me settled like dust after a slammed door. That evening I sat by the river, the scarf in my pocket again, watching the light die across the water. I thought about calling out to them, letting them explain, but every imagined scene ended the same. Their words couldn't reach the place I'd arrived at. I wrote a letter, not to mail, just to say what no longer needed saying. Greg, I saw you. You looked lost even with maps. You looked hungry even after lunch. I was once like that, believing value came from being useful. But I've learned something here. Distance is how we remember who we are. I folded the letter into my journal next to Greg's and felt the weight of the key again. The dream came that night, stronger now, Linda behind the locked door, her voice clear. The key is yours, Frank. Open it when you're ready. I woke with the compass in my hand, its needle steady, pointing not north but toward me. Days later, Lucy appeared at the guest house, standing in the doorway in a pink sundress, her eyes wide, lips parted. "Grandpa," she said, her voice trembling. "Are you really here?" I nodded. "I am." She stepped inside, her gaze landing on the yellow scarf hanging from a chair. "We saw it from the cafe that day." I wasn't sure, but I kept looking. She pulled a photo from her bag, one of us on a swing. When she was 5, Linda's handwriting on the back, Lucy's first push. Grandpa's steady hands. I touched the edge, my throat tight. "I remember that day," I said. "So do I," she whispered. "Better than yesterday." She stayed for 2 hours, her words soft but honest, telling me about school, about Max, about how she'd started talking to him like a diary. We didn't speak of Greg, or Caroline didn't need to. Her presence was an apology, unspoken, but real, a breath shared in the same room. Before she left, she hugged me, a real hug, the kind that says more than words. I didn't ask her to tell the others. I just said, "You'll always have a place by the river if you want to sit." She nodded and was gone. That night, I didn't write. I sat in the courtyard, the stars blinking awake, the key in my pocket. A quiet promise. For the first time in years, I felt like a grandfather again, not because of what I did, but because someone chose to see me. The train from Seville to Lisbon hummed beneath me, its rhythm a steady pulse that matched the quiet certainty growing inside. I sat by the window, my navy duffel at my feet. Linda's yellow scarf now draped loosely around my neck, its color a quiet proclamation I no longer hesitated to wear. The brass key etched with its faint L rested in my pocket beside the compass and my journal, its labyrinth cover worn from travel. These objects, note, postcard, key, compass, had become more than relics. They were fragments of a map I was still learning to read, guiding me not to a place, but to a version of myself I'd long forgotten. The locked box in Greg's desk still haunted me, its cold surface a shadow that followed me across continents. Was the key in my pocket meant for it, or for something deeper? A truth Linda had hidden, a secret my family kept. Her words from the dream in Cordoba echoed. "The key is yours, Frank. Open it when you're ready." I wasn't ready yet, but the weight of it felt less like a burden, and more like a promise, a mystery I'd unravel in my own time. Lisbon's light was softer now, the city welcoming me back like an old friend who'd kept my secrets. I returned to the guest house with chipped blue shutters, its familiarity a comfort I didn't need to explain. The woman at the desk, her hair still in a bun, handed me the same heavy key with a smile that didn't ask questions. "You've changed," she said, her eyes lingering on the scarf. "Maybe," I replied and climbed the stairs to my room. The creak of the wood, a song I knew by heart. The balcony overlooked the same narrow square, but it felt different now. Not because the city had changed, but because I had. I stood there letting the sea air curl around me, the compass in my hand trembling as if it sensed the shift. I didn't unpack. Instead, I walked to the fado bar I'd visited before its heavy door, and candlelit tables unchanged. The same singer, her gray hair loose, took the stage, her voice weaving stories of loss and longing that felt like mine and not mine at all. I sipped red wine, its sharpness grounding me, and let her music wash over me. This time I didn't cry. I listened, my hands steady, the key in my pocket, a quiet wait. When she passed my table, her eyes met mine again, and she nodded as if she saw the man I was becoming. Back at the guest house, I opened my journal and wrote, "I am not their shadow. I am my own light." The words felt like a vow, not to anyone else, but to myself. I wasn't running from Greg, Caroline, or the girls. I was walking toward a life I'd chosen, one where my worth didn't depend on their recognition. The key, the compass, Linda's note, they were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture they formed was me, whole and unbroken. The next morning, I received a text from Aiden Grandpa. "I drew you again. You're on a boat now with a scarf like a flag. Mom says you're being selfish, but I think you're being brave." Attached was another sketch. This one of me at the helm of a small boat, the yellow scarf streaming in the wind, a lighthouse in the distance. I smiled, my chest warm with pride, not for myself, but for him, for seeing what his parents couldn't. I replied, "Keep drawing, Aiden. You're braver than you know." I wandered Lisbon streets past the same bookstores and parks, but my steps were lighter now, unburdened by the need to explain myself. At a small market, I bought a leather bracelet from a woman with kind eyes, her fingers quick as she tied it around my wrist. "For strength," she said, and I nodded, not because I believed in charms, but because I believed in her intention. The bracelet joined the scarf, the key, the compass, a collection of small truths that anchored me. That afternoon, I found a guitar shop tucked behind a fountain, its windows filled with instruments that gleamed like polished memories. I hadn't played since Linda's illness, when my fingers were too heavy with grief to strum. The shopkeeper, a man named Miguel with a salt and pepper beard, handed me an acoustic guitar without a word. I sat on a stool, my hands finding the strings, and played a few chords. Halting at first, then smoother, a melody I didn't know I remembered. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Miguel clapped softly, his smile wide. "You've got stories in those hands," he said. I didn't buy the guitar, but I carried the music with me, a rhythm that matched the pulse of my steps. That night I dreamed again, this time of a door with no lock, Linda standing on the other side, her hands outstretched. "You're already through, Frank," she said, her voice a melody I couldn't forget. I woke with the compass in my hand, its needle steady, pointing not to a place, but to a feeling, freedom hard-won and quiet. I decided to leave Lisbon, not because I was done, but because the journey wasn't about staying still. I booked a flight to Bandon, Oregon, a coastal town Linda had once described as where the sea meets the soul. The name felt right, like a destination I'd been heading toward all along. I packed lightly, the duffel now a companion rather than a burden, its contents: journal, key, compass, note, postcard, a map of who I was becoming. The flight was long, the Pacific stretching below like a promise too vast to keep. I didn't sleep, just watched the clouds shift their shapes, suggesting stories I hadn't yet told. When we landed, it greeted me with a salt-soaked breeze and a sky so wide it made my chest ache. I checked into a small inn near the beach, its wooden floors creaking under my boots, its windows fogged with sea mist. The owner, a woman named Ruth with laugh lines and quick hands, handed me a key and a smile. "You look like you belong here," she said, and I didn't disagree. Bandon was quiet, its streets lined with driftwood sculptures and shops selling coffee and books. I walked to the beach, the sand cool under my feet, the yellow scarf bright against the gray sky. The waves were relentless, carving the shore with a patience I admired. I sat on a piece of driftwood, the compass in my hand, and let the sea speak. It didn't offer answers, but it offered space, and that was enough. I found work at a repair shop owned by a man named Tom, who fixed everything from bicycles to boat motors. He didn't ask about my past, just handed me a wrench and pointed to a rusted engine. "See what you can do," he said. And I did. My hands, once steady with copper wires, found their rhythm again, tightening bolts, cleaning gears, making broken things whole. Tom called me Mr. Frank, and the name stuck. Not because it was formal, but because it was mine. The townspeople started to know me not as Greg's father, not as Linda's widower, but as Mr. Frank, the man who could fix a lawnmower or a lamp with equal care. I didn't need their approval, but I welcomed their nods, their small talk about weather and tides. I ate dinner at a diner by the docks where the waitress Ellie knew my order: coffee black and a slice of pie, no rush. She called me the quiet one with the scarf, and I laughed, the sound surprising me with its ease. One evening, while tightening a chain on a bicycle, Tom handed me a postcard he'd found in the shop's storage. Its edges curled the image of a faded lighthouse under a stormy sky. On the back, in Linda's handwriting, was a single line: "Frank, the light is always there, even in the storm." My breath caught sharp and sudden. Another piece of her left for me to find, as if she'd known I'd end up here in this shop, in this town. I tucked it into my journal next to the others and felt the mystery deepen, not as a weight, but as a gift. That night I walked to the beach, the compass in one hand, the key in the other. The waves roared their rhythm, a language I was beginning to understand. I stood at the edge of the water, the scarf fluttering in the wind, and thought about the locked box in Greg's desk. I didn't need to open it to know it held their truths, not mine. The key in my pocket wasn't for their secrets. It was for me, for the doors I'd unlock in myself. I wrote in my journal, "I am Mr. Frank, the man who fixes what's broken, who carries light in his hands." The words felt like a name I'd earned, not given. I didn't dream that night, just slept with the window open, the sea's breath filling the room. Days turned to weeks, each one a small victory. I repaired a radio for Ellie, its static giving way to a clear signal, and she thanked me with a free slice of pie. I fixed a chair for Ruth, its legs wobbling until I tightened the screws, and she invited me to dinner with her family, their laughter a warmth I hadn't known I needed. I wasn't replacing my family. I was building a new one, not of blood, but of choice. One morning, while walking the beach, I found a small stone, smooth and gray, its surface etched with a faint spiral that matched the one on my journal. I carried it back to the inn, placed it in the wooden box with the key and Linda's relics, and felt a quiet completion. The mystery wasn't solved, but it didn't need to be. The key, the compass, the notes, they were signposts, not destinations, guiding me to a truth I'd already found. I was enough. My phone buzzed less often, now the messages from Greg and Caroline slowing to a trickle, their urgency fading like a tide pulling back. I answered Aidan when he wrote his texts filled with sketches and questions about the sea. I sent him a photo of the lighthouse, its beam cutting through the fog, and wrote, "This is where I am. Come visit someday." He replied with a rocket emoji and a promise, "I will." One evening, as I sat in the diner, the door opened, and Emma stepped inside, her hair tied back, her eyes wide, with something like recognition. She wore a jacket too thin for the coastal chill, and her hands fidgeted as if unsure of their purpose. "Grandpa," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I found you." I stood, the scarf bright against my sweater, and nodded. "You did." She sat across from me, Ellie, bringing her a coffee without being asked. Emma's words came slowly, then faster. A stream of apologies and explanations, how she'd seen my photo online, how she'd taken a bus from Portland, how she'd missed me without knowing why. "Mom and Dad don't get it," she said, her eyes on the table. "They think you're running away. But I think you're free." I smiled not because she was right, but because she saw me. "I'm just here," I said, and it was enough. We talked for hours about her college applications, about the songs she loved, about the way Max still slept on my old sweater. She showed me a photo on her phone, one of me and Linda laughing at a fair, my arm around her, the yellow scarf in her hair. "I found it in Mom's drawer," she said. "I think she kept it to remember you both." I touched the scarf around my neck, its fibers soft with time, and felt Linda's presence not as a ghost, but as a light that hadn't dimmed. "Keep it," I told Emma, handing her the photo. "It's yours now." She left the next morning promising to write, and I believed her. I walked to the beach, the stone in my pocket, the compass in my hand, and stood at the water's edge. The key was still there. Its L, a quiet mystery I didn't need to solve. I wasn't the man who stayed, nor the man who ran. I was Mr. Frank, the man who fixed things, who carried a scarf like a flag, who lived in a town where the sea met the soul. I wrote one last entry in my journal. "The key is mine, and so am I." I closed it, the labyrinth cover warm under my fingers, and let the waves carry the rest. The mystery wasn't gone, but it was no longer a weight. It was a spark, a light I'd carry wherever I went next. The Bandon morning arrived with a quiet insistence, the kind that doesn't demand but invites. I woke to the sound of waves, their rhythm a steady pulse, through the open window of my room at the inn. The air smelled of salt and cedar, a scent that had become as familiar as my own breath. My navy duffel sat in the corner, its leather straps worn but loyal, Linda's yellow scarf draped over it like a banner of battles won. The brass key, etched with its faint L, rested in my pocket beside the compass, and my journal, its labyrinth cover now soft from months of handling. These objects, note, postcard, key, compass, stone, were no longer questions, but companions, pieces of a life I'd claimed step by step. The locked box in Greg's desk lingered in my mind, a shadow that had softened but not vanished. I hadn't opened it, didn't need to. The key in my pocket wasn't for their secrets. It was for mine, a symbol of the doors I'd unlocked within myself. Linda's words from the dream in Cordoba. "The key is yours, Frank. Open it when you're ready," had become a truth I carried, not a puzzle to solve. The mystery of what my family hid was theirs to keep. Mine was the freedom to let it go. I shaved in the small bathroom, the mirror reflecting a face I now recognized, not the father who stayed, not the widower who mourned, but Mr. Frank, the man who fixed things, who wore a yellow scarf like a flag. I tied it loosely around my neck, its color bright against the gray sweater, and stepped outside. The beach stretched before me, its sand marked by the tide's patient hand, driftwood, scattered like poems left unfinished. I walked slowly, the compass in my hand, its needle steady, pointing not to a place, but to a feeling, peace, hard-earned and quiet. At the repair shop, Tom was already at work, his hand steady on a boat motor that sputtered like a tired heart. He nodded as I entered, his eyes crinkling with a smile. "Mr. Frank, you're late," he teased, though the clock showed I was early. "Blame the sea," I replied, and he laughed, the sound warm in the cool air. I took my place at the workbench, my fingers finding a bicycle chain that needed tightening. The work was simple, grounding, a language my hands still spoke fluently. I wasn't an electrician anymore, but I was still a man who made things work, and that was enough. The townspeople knew me now, not as a stranger, but as a fixture, like the lighthouse that stood at the edge of Bandon, its beam cutting through the fog each night. Ellie, the waitress at the diner, called me "Scarf Guy" and saved me the best slice of pie. Ruth, the inn's owner, invited me to her Sunday dinners, where her grandchildren taught me card games I lost with a grin. They didn't ask about my past, and I didn't offer it. They saw me as I was, Mr. Frank. The man who fixed their radios, their chairs, their small broken things, and that was the truest name I'd ever worn. One morning, while repairing a lamp for a woman who sold crab traps, I found another relic in my duffel, a small folded letter tucked inside a pocket I hadn't checked in months. The paper was brittle. Linda's handwriting faint but unmistakable. "Frank, the sea knows you better than they do. Trust it." My breath caught sharp and sudden, as if she'd whispered the words in my ear. Had she hidden this letter years ago, knowing I'd find it here in this town where the sea met the soul? Or was it chance, a gift from a universe that understood more than I did? I tucked the letter into my journal next to the postcard of the lighthouse, the note from Florence, the sketch from Aiden. Each was a piece of the mystery, not of betrayal but of love, Linda's love guiding me long after she was gone. I walked to the beach that afternoon, the stone with its spiral etching in my pocket, and stood at the water's edge. The waves rolled in relentless but kind, and I felt her presence not as a ghost, but as a light that hadn't dimmed. I didn't need to open Greg's box to know what mattered. I'd already found it. My phone buzzed less often now, the messages from Greg and Caroline fading like footprints in the tide. Aiden wrote weekly, his texts filled with sketches and questions about the sea, the stars, the way a compass finds its way. I answered each one, my words simple but honest, a bridge between us that didn't need their permission. Lucy sent a postcard from college, a photo of a campus fountain, her handwriting looping across the back. "Grandpa, I'm studying art history, like Grandma. Wish you could see it." I pinned it to the wall of my room next to a driftwood carving. I'd made a spiral that matched the stone in my pocket. One evening, as I sat in the diner, Ellie slid a slice of blueberry pie across the counter, her smile soft. "You've got a visitor," she said, nodding toward the door. I turned, expecting Tom or Ruth, but there was Emma, her jacket still too thin for the coastal chill, her eyes bright with something like hope. She carried a small backpack, its straps frayed, and a photograph I recognized, the one of me and Linda at the fair, the yellow scarf in her hair. "Grandpa," she said, her voice steady but soft. I came back. I stood, the scarf warm against my neck, and gestured to the seat across from me. "Sit," I said, and she did, her hands fidgeting until Ellie brought her a coffee. We talked not about the past, but about now, her classes, her roommate's bad cooking, the way she'd started sketching like Aiden. She showed me the photo again, her fingers tracing Linda's smile. "I found it in Mom's drawer," she said. "She kept it hidden like she was afraid to remember." I nodded, the key in my pocket, a quiet weight. "Some things are easier to hide than to face," I said, and she looked at me, her eyes searching. "Are you mad at them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "Not anymore. I was tired, Emma, tired of being a shadow. Now I'm just here." She smiled, a small, real smile, and reached across the table to touch my hand. "I see you, Grandpa." Those words were a gift, heavier than the key, brighter than the compass. We talked until the diner emptied, Ellie wiping down tables with a knowing grin. Emma stayed the night at the inn in the room next to mine, and we walked the beach the next morning, the waves whispering secrets we didn't need to share. She left that afternoon promising to return, and I believed her, not because I needed her to, but because she wanted to. I didn't hear from Greg or Caroline again, not directly. A letter arrived a week later, forwarded by Mel, who'd been feeding Max and collecting my mail. It was from Greg, his handwriting uneven, as if written in a rush. "Dad, I don't know where you are, but I hope you're okay. We're okay too, just figuring things out. I'm sorry for the passes, for the years, for everything. I don't expect you to come back. Just know I'm trying to remember the man you were. R. Love, Greg." I read it twice, then folded it into my journal next to Linda's letters, Aiden's sketches, Lucy's postcard. It wasn't forgiveness I felt, not exactly, but understanding, a quiet acceptance that their story wasn't mine to carry. I wrote a reply, not to mail but to set free. "Greg, I'm not coming back, not because I'm angry, but because I'm home. Be good to your girls. They see more than you think." I mailed the wooden box, the one with the labyrinth carving, holding the key, the stone, and Linda's relics, to my old address, addressed to Aiden. No note, just a label, "For when you're ready." I didn't need to hold those things anymore. They'd done their work, guiding me to this moment, this place. Days turned to weeks, each one a small ritual of living. I fixed a boat motor for Tom, a radio for Ellie, a chair for Ruth's grandson. I walked the beach at dawn, the compass in my hand, its needle steady now pointing to me. I played guitar at the inn some evenings, my fingers finding chords. I thought I'd forgotten Ruth's grandchildren clapping like it was a concert. They called me Mr. Frank, and I let them the name, a gift I hadn't asked for but welcomed. One morning, as I sat on the driftwood bench, the sea stretching before me, I felt a shift, subtle but certain. The mystery of the locked box, the key, Linda's notes, it wasn't gone, but it was no longer a weight. It was a story, one I'd written with every step, every choice, every quiet rebellion. I pulled the yellow scarf tighter, its color a light I carried, and wrote one final entry in my journal. I am Mr. Frank, the man who lives where the sea meets the soul. The key was always mine, and so is the peace. I closed the journal, its pages full, and stood the waves singing a song I knew by heart. The lighthouse beam swept across the water, steady and unyielding, and I walked back to the inn, my boots leaving prints in the sand that the tide would soon erase. I didn't need to be remembered, not by them, not by anyone. I was here now, and that was enough. As I reached the inn, Ruth waved from the porch, a mug of coffee in her hand. "Mr. Frank, you're late for breakfast," she called, her voice warm with mock reproach. I laughed, the sound light and free. "Blame the sea," I said, and stepped inside the door, closing softly behind me.